This video and all of its contents, including any opinions expressed by the narrator, are strictly for entertainment purposes only and is not intended in any way as a substitute for professional services and consultation from a licensed therapist, doctor, attorney, or other licensed professional service provider. Each person must make their own life decisions, and those decisions are theirs. Welcome back to Find Your Alpha, one of your favorite channels on YouTube, and we're back at you this week with another great story. You can see the title right on your screen. Cheating girlfriend and her parents went psycho after I ghosted her. Now, let's get into this story and see what it's all about. He starts out and he says, "Take this post for what it's worth. I think it will be helpful for some and to others just an entertaining read. This saga all started about 9 years ago when I was 24 and my then girlfriend was 22. For this post, I'll refer to my girlfriend as Melissa and to myself as Nigel. At the time, I had been working for about 2 years as an account manager for a well-known tech company. I moved to the city for this job, and while I loved the work and was making phenomenal money, I was lost and very lonely. Being so far away from friends and family and in a strange place, I threw myself into my job. I used dating apps and went out on occasion to bars, but only had a few dates, nothing serious. Then one day I was out at a local place by myself listening to a band and noticed Melissa. She walked into the bar and sat down on one of the stools. I watched her from a table thinking this pretty girl has to be there waiting for someone. I then saw her place an order with the bartender. When she got her drink, she turned to watch the band. I thought to myself, this girl is all alone. As luck or unluck would have it, a stool opened up right beside her, and I headed over there to claim it. I asked her if the seat was taken. She replied no, it was all mine. When the band took a break, she and I started talking and immediately bonded. She had recently moved to the city for work and was feeling kind of lost too. From that night on, things moved quickly for us. We had our first date that very weekend and officially became an exclusive couple a week later. I was head over heels in love, and again in this story, I have to tell the OP, no, you were not head over heels in love after just a week of dating. You were in lust, my friend. I have to admit back then I felt like she was an angel sent to fill the deep, empty void in my life. After about a month, she basically started living at my place, even though she still had a small apartment of her own. A few months later, her lease came up, and instead of renewing it, I asked her to move in with me after just 5.5 months of dating. Big mistake there, moving in just after 5.5 months. What are you thinking? I really thought I had found the one. So this guy was just totally smitten. You can see that. My parents like Melissa. While her parents gave me bad vibes, her dad is a high school football coach and gym teacher. He initially hardly spoke to me and barely made eye contact. In fact, when we met, I extended my hand, but he just turned away. I got the sense the guy didn't like me. Her mom was just obnoxious. She's one of those loud, overbearing people who are really unpleasant to be around. You know the type. When we announced we were moving in together, my parents expressed their displeasure, saying it was too soon. Well, you should have listened to your parents. Her parents blew a gasket until they found out I would be paying 75% of the rent and expenses, including food. They seemed okay with it, though not completely happy. As time went on, my relationship with Melissa got better and better. Things were going so well that I started thinking about when I would pop the question. Even her wacky parents started treating me with respect and as part of the family, especially after I got a big promotion and no longer required Melissa to pay anything to live with me. Another big mistake. I don't care what she's earning. You've got to make her contribute. All of a sudden, they saw me as future son-in-law material and started visiting us a few times each month, he says, unfortunately. Melissa's dad, who treated me like dirt before, started treating me like his best friend after I took him to several professional sports games and we sat and ate in my company's luxury box. Even though his sentiment changed, I never trusted the guy. I just had a bad feeling about him. He seemed to be a powder keg of rage just waiting to explode at any minute. More about this later. So everything for Melissa and I was going great until around the ninth month of our cohabitation. It was then I started to notice a few subtle changes that immediately sparked my suspicion. The first was one day when I walked up on her while she was texting and she nearly jumped out of her skin and hid her phone away from my view. Her excuse for acting like that was she claimed I startled her. Well, that's your first red flag. The next was just the sheer volume of texts she was getting. When I questioned this, she said it was just from her work colleagues. I noticed right after that the number of texts she was getting nearly stopped, only to find out later it was because she silenced the alerts. Red flag number two. Then she started taking her phone to bed with her and putting it on her nightstand instead of on the charger alongside my phone on our dresser. Red flag number three. Taking that phone and keeping it close to her even when she's sleeping. I knew at that point something was going on, and her phone held all the answers. One night she fell asleep and left her bedside lamp on. I got up and went around to her side to turn it off. She was sound asleep, so I thought this would be my chance to snoop. I picked up her phone and entered the code, but she had changed it. Red flag number four. I'm assuming previously he knew what her passcode was. Now all of a sudden out of the blue she changed it and didn't advise him. That's a definite red flag. I then tried holding the phone in front of her face to open it, but since her eyes were closed, the facial recognition didn't work. I hit a dead end but knew her changing her password without telling me was another sign she was hiding something. Then that Saturday, through an odd twist of fate, I was able to get into her phone. She and I were sitting at the kitchen table and I noticed she left her phone in the living room on top of the TV. Apparently her mom had been trying to call her, but since she had the phone silenced, we didn't hear it. Her mom then called me and I handed Melissa my phone to talk to her. The two of them started talking about some nonsense I can't remember, but they were heavy into conversation. Just before her mom called, Melissa was about to head out to the store to grab a few things for her lunch. I think she forgot she was using my phone and said to me she was going to run out to the store. I said okay, and she continued talking to her mother as she left the apartment, leaving me there alone with her phone. As soon as she got outside, I locked the door behind her and went to retrieve her phone, hoping the auto lock hadn't kicked in. Thankfully it didn't, and I was able to get right in. What I found was a string of text messages between her and a person listed as Sharon Work. This is how she had all of her coworkers labeled in her phone, so she obviously did this as a decoy. I had never heard her speak of this Sharon before, and when I read the messages, I found out that Sharon was actually a guy from her office. I'll call him Rob. I had never met Rob before, but found out later he was 39 years old, and he and his wife had just entered into an open marriage. Their first text dated back a little over 2 weeks prior, which just so happened to coincide with when her suspicious behavior began. The text indicated the first time they were together physically happened just that past Monday. Curiously, Melissa told me she went to the walk-in clinic after work on Monday for a burning urethra. This was all a huge lie, as she spent that time with her lover boy Rob. When she came home, she told me she had been diagnosed with a UTI, a urinary tract infection, and we'd have to abstain for a while until she got rid of it. Looking back now, I have to admit the UTI excuse was brilliant, as it gave her an alibi for coming home late and an excuse for not having us with me. I wanted nothing more than to confront her when she got back and throw her cheating self out, but I played it cool and contemplated my next move. What I eventually decided to do was to secretly abandon her without explanation. I already paid the 10th month of the 12-month apartment lease and only had 2 months remaining, with the final month being free of charge as part of the promotion I got when I renewed the lease. I really lucked out here. My plan was to get another place, and one day while she was at work, I would move all my stuff to my new place and ghost her, and that's what I did. I got a new apartment 25 minutes away and arranged for a local moving franchise to move all my stuff out to my new place. The only furniture I left her was the spare bed and mattress. The day I moved out, I went to the office and gave them my cancellation notice. I paid for the month 11 and explained to the leasing agent that I had already moved out, but my former girlfriend would likely be staying there through the end of the lease term. The leasing agent suggested we do a walkthrough together so she could take pictures of the current condition of the apartment in the event that anything was damaged during the final months of the lease. I agreed, and we did just that. That was probably pretty smart. As it so happened, the day I moved out, Melissa and Rob had another rendezvous planned. She texted me in the afternoon stating that she had to work over and would be home about 90 minutes late. She said she would get takeout from our favorite place and bring it home for us. I said okay and gave her my order knowing I wouldn't be there. As expected, at around 7 o'clock, she started blowing up my phone. First with multiple missed calls followed by a barrage of texts asking what was going on. Finally, after a couple hours of making her sweat, I called her. She answered crying and asked me what was going on. I told her that I knew all about Rob and that we were done. She was silent on the other end as I explained I had canceled the lease and she could live there through the end of the term. She then spoke up through tears, saying she could explain everything and that it's not what it seems. I told her to save it and to not make a fool of herself. She kept going on saying she was sorry for the misunderstanding and begging me, but at that point I had heard enough and hung up. The rest of the night, she kept calling and texting, but I took a page out of her playbook and silenced my phone. I slept like a baby that night. The next morning, I woke up and my voicemail box was full, so I deleted all her messages and then blocked her number, as having a full voicemail is a violation of company policy. As an account manager, I work mostly from the road, so she couldn't ambush me at the office. So now she had no way of reaching me since she didn't know where I was staying. I thought to myself, wow, I played this like a pro and got out of this bad situation with minimal damage. Well, I soon found out I wasn't completely rid of her. Remember her wacky parents? They still weren't done with me. A few weeks after I ghosted Melissa, I signed into Facebook for the first time in weeks, and to my surprise, I saw numerous posts by Melissa's mom and replies from some of her friends. Her mom made several posts saying I was mentally abusive to her daughter, gave her an STD, and then abandoned her. Yes, I'm serious, folks, this woman is so ignorant. She actually posted on the internet that her daughter had contracted an STD. The first thing I did after reading this was get tested myself, and thankfully the results came back all clear. Phew, he says, thank God for that. I was so angry about the post I decided to sue Melissa's mom. I went to an attorney recommended by one of my coworkers, and he drafted a demand letter to Melissa's mom ordering her to stop making false claims against me and to immediately remove all current postings, as I would be suing her for libel and slander. The attorney advised me to follow through with suing her even if she complied. The same evening of the day that Melissa's mom received the letter from my attorney, I was confronted by Melissa's father outside of my apartment building. Now listen to this. He says, I don't know how he found out where I lived, but he did. He approached me from the back as I was walking up to the security doors at the front of the building. I heard someone call my name. I turned around and saw it was him. Before I could do or say anything, he walked right over to me and grabbed me around the collar and neck and starts lifting me, saying, you son of a. I told him, hey, what are you doing? You're choking me. I then went into full survival mode. I jerked back away from him and with my right arm swung as hard as I could. My right fist connected directly with the side of his nose. I had never hit anything or anyone that hard before, and when I did, I heard a loud crack. He immediately dropped to the ground, stumbling off, holding his bleeding nose and screaming in agony. I started towards him to help, but then thought I'd better not, and instead called the police, as this lunatic would be the type to falsely accuse me. I called the police, told them everything that happened, and they filed a report. I then told them my building has a security camera and I would call the office tomorrow to have them provide the tape. I called and they provided me with a 6-minute clip of the time in question. The video clip and sound clearly showed Melissa's dad ambushed me, grabbed me by the neck, and lifted me off the ground before I swung. After reviewing the footage, the investigating officer asked if I wanted to press charges. Based on what he saw in the tape, he recommended I do so. So I did and obtained a temporary restraining order. Since her parents live in a different jurisdiction, the officer said they would be back in touch in a few days with an update. Well, 2 days later, I got a call from my attorney. He informed me that he had been contacted by an attorney representing Melissa's parents. Apparently, they had received a letter from my attorney and her dad had been contacted by the local police. My attorney said their attorney told him they were willing to do anything to resolve these matters with me as they didn't want to be sued and her father didn't want a criminal record. Though I wanted nothing more for them to sweat and suffer a little, in the end I agreed not to sue them and to drop the charges against her father. In exchange, they both agreed to a full written confession of guilt for both the libel/slander and for the unprovoked attack. Her mother also was ordered to post a statement on her Facebook account for 6 months explaining that all the previous statements she made about me were false. Like I said, I really would have liked to make both of these maggots suffer, but I was just glad to finally be done with this family, but unfortunately the fun didn't stop there. About 6 months later, I was out at a bar with several of my coworkers when I ran into a woman who used to work with Melissa. I always liked this woman as she seemed genuine. In our conversation, she proceeded to let me know that Melissa is pregnant and was probably close to her due date now. She then told me it was known that Melissa and Rob had a thing and they told people in the office they both were in open relationships. She said about a month or so after I broke up with Melissa, Rob left the company and she later heard he divorced his wife. Now listen to this. She said the rumor is that Rob's wife contracted HSV-2, that's herpes, through one of her open marriage partners and gave it to Rob, who then gave it to Melissa. See what promiscuity without protection gets you? I again thank God I found out about this and broke up with her before she infected me, but that wasn't everything. She said Melissa had told everyone that the baby she's carrying is mine and that after it's born, she hoped we can reconcile. He says, what the? There's no way the baby was mine based on the dates, so I immediately contacted my attorney and had him send a cease and desist letter to her. Later, I found out through the same former coworker of Melissa that she had given birth to a little boy and the poor kid acquired HSV-2 during birth from his mother and almost didn't survive. Apparently, the virus is very dangerous to infants, that poor kid. While I despise that entire family, I feel really bad for that baby being born into the world with an incurable STD he got from his mother. Poor kid, I hope he grows up and lives a healthy and successful life. He says, well, that's my nightmare relationship story. As I said, I'm not looking for anything, I just wanted to share my story for what it's worth. May you live well, Nigel. So that's the end of his story, and he doesn't have any updates, but he did get a number of replies to his post, and in some of the replies he responded to some questions. So let's take a look at those now, but before we do, I want to remind you, if you like what you've heard so far, be sure to hit that like button. That will make sure this video gets seen by people all over the planet. So now, let's take a look at some of those questions he got and his replies back to the people that responded to him. The first one's from a guy. He says, have you had any contact with Melissa since this happened? The OP says, thankfully I haven't. The last time we communicated was 7+ years ago. I don't know what happened to her or her parents. They deleted all their social media accounts after our fiasco. I wish them well, especially the child who was born into that horrible family with a terrible disease. And I have to agree with this guy. I didn't realize that this herpes virus could be so deadly to newborns, but I looked it up after reading this story, and it's just a terrible condition, and I do feel sorry for that kid. I don't know the kid, of course, but I feel really bad for a kid that would be born into the world like that, acquiring herpes from his mother, and that's something he's going to have for the rest of his life. So I too wish this young kid nothing but the best, and I hope he has a very prosperous and successful and happy life. Next, we got another question from a guy. He says, "Why didn't you drop the charges against her old man?" If that were me, I would have done everything I could have to put that idiot in jail. The OP responds and he says, "I hear you, but you have to understand, I just wanted to be done with them and to get my life back on track. I accomplished that, and I'm happy with the outcome and how I handled things. I sure learned some valuable lessons." When I look back at this, he said that her dad was a high school football coach. I bet her dad was used to going up to his players and grabbing them by the shoulder pads and maybe lifting them off the ground. So I think he probably approached the OP that way when he confronted him outside of his apartment building, not expecting that the OP was going to react in a defensive posture and then just slug him, which he should have, because that's totally self-defense in that case. Like I've said in all my videos, I'm totally against violence, but in the case of self-defense, I think it's absolutely warranted. And then finally, a question from a woman. Now listen to what she says. She says, "What's your relationship status now? Are you married or seeing anyone currently?" She says, "P.S. I'm available, wink wink." The OP responds and says, "I'm not married and don't ever intend to, but I've been seeing a great woman for the past 3 years and would like to build a family with her someday. She's younger, so we've still got time." And that's a good point that the OP makes. He wants to go out and build a family with this woman, but as he says here, he's never getting married. So guys, remember that you can go out and build a family with a woman. Have children with her, you don't have to get married. And now with that, I want to cover what I think are the morals of this story. And there were a ton of them. The first one, never rush into a relationship. These situations rarely turn out well. And you see what happened to this guy. What did he do? I mean, he moved this woman into his apartment after 5.5 months and then started paying all of her bills. Huge mistake. Number two, if her parents are crazy, there's a chance she could be as well. And I would say there's a very good chance she could be as well. And the old saying about never sticking your in crazy. That applies here. Number three, always keep your cool and never employ violence unless it is a case of self-defense like I just said. Number four, ghosting is, by far and away, the best way to break up with the cheater. Because guess what? You don't have to deal with all the nonsense and all the lies they're going to try to spin to you. And all the begging and the pleading. Nope, you just walk away clean. Yeah, you're still going to be broken up inside, but you're going to get over it much faster because guess what? You took back control of the situation. And finally, living a great life is the best possible revenge. I'm sure this Melissa has followed this Nigel's life over time, and she's probably just beating herself up saying, "He was mine and I blew it. I let him get away. He's the one that got away. He's living a great life now and my life is absolutely miserable. He's totally forgotten about me. Meanwhile, I'm thinking about him every day." I guarantee that's what's going on with her. So those are my thoughts, people. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Have you ever gone through something like this? Tell us about it in the comments. Also be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel, and I will his request for a pause shattered our perfect facade. I found solace in another man's arms. Now, with both men at my crossroads, the choice I make will unravel my future or bind me further to my own mistakes. My breath hitched as I pushed the stroller, our dog bouncing beside us. Was I seeing things? Had my rattled mind conjured her out of thin air? No. There they were, him with her, just like the pictures had shown. My fingers tightened on the stroller's handle and the dog whined, sensing the change in me. I tried to push it away, the sinking feeling in my stomach every morning he walked out the door with a distracted, "See you later." But seeing them together, it was like the whole world tilted. His hand on her back, a gesture so casual it screamed practiced familiarity. And their laughter, it ripped at something inside me, a raw mix of fury and a pathetic kind of longing. Longing for something I should hate. I blinked, and they were still there, walking toward me. The dog strained at its leash, and in that moment, all I wanted was to disappear. No confrontation, no screaming match. This wasn't a scene I wanted. Not after all the silent, sleepless nights I'd spent with an empty pillow beside me. Mark, I forced my voice steady. It was my name he stumbled over. Her eyes flicked over me. The baggy sweats, the unwashed hair, then quickly away. I knew what she saw. I'd seen it in the mirror the last few weeks too. I'd never been the glowing, perfectly polished type, but now I barely recognized myself. This is a surprise, he finally managed. I focused on the stroller, the way my son's tiny hand curled around a plastic toy. He'd been the only thing holding me together. I was walking, my voice barely above a whisper. That was all I could trust myself to say. Mark shifted, his discomfort radiating off of him. Hey, we should. He glanced at her, and something unspoken passed between them. With a nod, she offered an awkward smile and melted down the street. They didn't look back, but they didn't need to. The image branded itself in my mind. His hand at the small of her back, the way his shoulders relaxed in her presence. Things he hadn't shown me in months. A sob built in my throat, but I swallowed hard, focusing on my son's cheerful gurgle. Let's go home, buddy, I said, my voice raspy and thick. Mommy's got some things to figure out. My hands trembled as I clicked open another email, the mundane words blurring before my eyes. The office, normally my refuge, swirled into nothing more than gray walls and harsh fluorescent lights. Each minute felt like an hour, then another, trapped in my own suffocating bubble of misery. Suddenly, the door slammed open. My brother, Ryan, stood there, face blotchy, voice thundering. What the hell is going on? You look like you haven't slept in a month, and he's just waltzing around with her? I flinched, the words cutting deeper than he intended. He needed space, I managed, the word catching in my throat. Ryan slammed his fist on my desk. Space, that's bull, and you know it. His outburst echoed down the hall, footsteps followed, and suddenly my office was a stage set for an awkward workplace intervention. Later that night, when the office lay empty and dark, the buzzing in my ears finally subsided. The silence felt heavier, oppressive. And then came the worst part, the texts. I miss you, I'm so sorry. The words appeared, glowing in the dim room. It was a familiar script by now. A few nights later came more. I made a mistake, can we talk? I typed and deleted replies a dozen times, anger and sorrow warring inside me. In the end, I tossed the phone away. Whatever I wrote wouldn't change anything. Things shifted at home, too. His sister, once a source of light-hearted chat, now offered only stilted phone calls. Family gatherings that used to be filled with warmth simmered with a quiet tension. I felt the judgment, saw the questions in their glances. My parents dropped by one Sunday, the pretense of a casual visit thin as tissue paper. Mom's perfectly manicured nails dug into my arm when she hugged me. Darling, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, are you sure? I broke away, a bitter laugh escaping me. Sure about what, Mom? That my marriage is falling apart? I think I get that part. Her eyes held tears, and underneath the worry was disappointment. Not that I blamed her. It had painted our whole family in a tainted light. You should check out his work. Quite something, isn't it? My colleague, Sarah, had no way of knowing the weight of her words. Each syllable echoed as the name rolled off her tongue, Liam. Not just the man she'd seen with Mark, but now an elusive artist with an upcoming show. That mischievous grin, the winter fire eyes, the descriptions I'd overheard whispered in the cafe were searing themselves into my memory. The gallery felt wrong, too bright, too stark white, setting the stage for a confrontation I hadn't planned. And there he was, talking to a cluster of admirers, that same mischievous grin gracing his lips. For a moment, time seemed to stutter. He caught my eye over the crowd, and something flickered in his gaze. Not guilt, not shame, but an electrifying spark of awareness. The next few days were a blur of stolen glances across busy office hallways and carefully coded emails under the guise of seeking professional advice. Soon, late-night texts weren't just from Mark, but from him. Texts discussing work, philosophy, his art, the intellectual sparring, the way he hung onto my words. It was intoxication that seeped into the cracks of my fractured world. A small package arrived at my doorstep, an old, worn book of poetry. On the first page, a quote was highlighted in blue ink, a quote about desire, about the fire of something new, of possibilities. My hands trembled. It was our code now, a forbidden language blooming in highlighted passages and shared books. Just a quick lunch to pick your brain? His email seemed innocuous enough, and I fell for the trap. What started as a business lunch stretched into a walk through the park, the golden afternoon light weaving a spell around us. We talked everything but Mark. He spoke of dreams, of art, of a life filled with passion, while mine felt colorless, muted by betrayal. With his words, he painted a picture of me I thought I had lost, someone intelligent, vibrant. He saw the potential energy simmering beneath the weary facade, the cracks my own husband had begun to overlook. And in the potent mix of his attention and my own hunger for validation, a recklessness started to take root. The gallery was packed for the private showing, abuzz with a mixture of pretentious chatter and genuine excitement. Liam's art, abstract and bold, took up the walls, an explosion of color in the otherwise sterile space. As I reached for a champagne flute, his hand brushed mine on purpose. It was a fleeting touch, but the charge that arced between us made my breath hitch. My heart pounded, a mixture of exhilaration and guilt. Later that night, away from the bright lights and watchful eyes, the memory of that tiny spark burned in my mind. I scrolled through messages, my brother's voice booming in my head. "You seem different. Is there something you're not telling me? Is there someone else?" I'd brushed him off, but his words echoed uneasily now. The reality at home couldn't be ignored. A belated birthday text from Mark, a threadbare excuse about a late meeting. He was fading, not just from our marriage, but as a person. The excuses were flimsy, the distance palpable. I was clinging to the frayed edges of what was once our life, while he floated further out of reach, anchored to another. Back at the gallery a few days later, the thrill and the guilt warred within me. The brush of hands became shared coffee, shared thoughts, the intoxicating thrill of talking with someone who made me forget about the mess at home. One afternoon in a quiet corner, amidst the vibrant chaos of Liam's canvases, it happened. The stolen kiss tasted of desperation and champagne. It was reckless, an act of rebellion. It was fire in a place where I had long felt only ice. The rush of it, the danger, made my head spin. Ryan was waiting for me at home that night, a look of thunder on his face, as I walked through the door. "Enough of this," he declared, his voice thick with a mix of anger and concern. "Him or him. You choose, sister. You can't go on like this, destroying yourself." His words hung heavy in the air, an ultimatum disguised as a plea for my sanity. My hand trembled as I replaced the tiny SIM card, a whole separate phone tucked into my purse. It felt like madness, yet a heady kind of madness. Every stolen text to Liam was a tiny act of rebellion, each whispered phone call behind a locked bathroom door a thread pulled loose from the tapestry of my ordinary life. I wove lies like a spider weaves its web, an appointment here, a work dinner there. It was frightening how easily it came, how quickly I slipped into this shadow existence, balancing two lives with a precarious precision. The poets knew, my old literature professor said in class one day, her voice ringing with a peculiar clarity in the stuffy lecture hall. Sometimes the greatest storms are the ones that bring us back to shore. The weight of her words settled on my shoulders. Did she know? Did she sense the turmoil swirling just beneath the surface of my life? The clues multiplied. A concert ticket I'd never heard of, tucked inside the pocket of his jeans. The lingering scent of a perfume I didn't recognize on his sweatshirt. Each piece of evidence felt heavy in my trembling hands, a testament to a love that no longer belonged to me. His sister's eyes were on me, sharp and probing. She didn't need to say anything. The shift in her brother, the hollow echoes where laughter used to be, told her everything. She became a silent judge, her unspoken questions pricking at my conscience. The confrontation was an accident waiting to happen. I know, I whispered, my voice a threadbare echo in our half-remodeled kitchen, the unfinished walls a brutal portrait of our fractured lives. Mark looked bewildered, like a deer caught in headlights. His response was pathetic, a desperate scrambling. It's her or me, he sputtered, as if I held any power in this broken equation. The choice was made the moment I'd tasted another man's kiss. That night, I spilled everything to Ryan. My confession unfolded between sobs, the words tumbling out, detailing both the thrill and the misery my reckless path had brought. Ryan, ever my protector, remained eerily quiet in the face of my betrayal. It was an uncharacteristic silence, the stillness before his righteous fury. His things left in a whirlwind overnight, boxes stacked in the garage, his side of the closet eerily empty. The house, once a shared space, echoed with his absence. It felt like a hollow shell of what it once was, a grim reminder of love gone cold. Work transformed into a minefield, the pity in well-meaning eyes, the awkward silences. I went from being Sarah's colleague to that woman whose husband left. Every whispered conversation felt like a judgment, each sympathetic glance a stark reminder that my personal tragedy was now office gossip. Maybe, my brother started cautiously one evening, a flicker of doubt clouding his usually steady support. Maybe you ran to him too quickly. Before you sorted everything with Mark. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and unwelcome. A nagging part of me wondered if he was right. Had I sought escape, solace, and validation in Liam's arms too soon? Mark's texts flooded my phone like a desperate downpour. I'm so sorry, I'll fix this, please. I left each notification unopened. It wasn't cruelty that drove me, but a newfound sense of self-preservation. But the one silence that cut deeper than all the rest was Liam's. The once intimate conversations, the shared stolen moments, they'd vanished overnight. The gallery where we'd met, the park where we'd talked into the twilight hours, they felt cold and empty without his electrifying presence. Was I just an escape for him too? A distraction, an amusement, now rendered pointless since the thrill of the forbidden had faded? Had I fooled myself into believing this whirlwind of passion was anything but a temporary respite from a broken life? The weight of it all, the fractured marriage, the office whispers, my brother's waning support, and Liam's unsettling silence, pressed down on me. In the stillness of the night, surrounded by memories and unanswered questions, a chilling realization dawned. I was alone. Christmas dinner this year was a fractured affair. On his side, stilted apologies and whispered conversations that petered out when I walked into the room. On mine, a silence thicker and more accusatory than words. The festive cheer felt like a mockery of the empty spaces in my life. His calls became a familiar ache. Please, can we talk? I made a mistake. There was a desperate edge to his voice now, a pleading I hadn't heard before. But the shattered pieces of trust wouldn't mend. The courtroom was clinical, devoid of warmth. The lawyer droned on about assets, custody of the dog, words that felt painfully foreign after years of ours and we. The judge's gavel brought a final, shattering blow. The decree absolute lay on the table, proof of our uncoupling made painfully official. Can I take you to coffee? My old professor's email startled me. It had been weeks since I'd attended her class. It felt like a lifeline tossed my way. Storms don't just tear things down, she told me. Stirring her latte, they rearrange the landscape. Make space for something new to grow. Her words echoed, a fragile thread of hope when I'd started to see only destruction. I saw him at the grocery store of all places, rummaging through the vegetable section with a lost-looking expression. He'd lost weight, looked shrunken somehow. In a split second, our eyes met, but instead of the electrifying thrill of before, a weary acknowledgement flickered between us and then vanished. We didn't speak, didn't need to. That spark, that dangerous thing I'd sought in those stolen moments, it was extinguished, leaving just the faint wisps of smoke. He was no longer a mystery, but a stranger. A man who had caused me pain, who was on his own path now. And I, with a heavy heart and a newfound resolve, was finally on mine. 3 in the morning is a terrible hour for clarity. The world sleeps, my willpower slumbers, and loneliness settles over me like a suffocating blanket. 2 glasses of wine in, his name flashes on my phone screen, a siren call cutting through the darkness. Shame washed over me, then a desperate defiance. I didn't even try to justify it as I pressed the call button. His husky hello was like a jolt to a dead battery. Conversation flowed like it never had in the last months, effortless and familiar. I hung up shaken, exhilarated, and deeply ashamed of my own weakness. One last coffee, then I'll cut ties, I promise. The mantra looped in my head as I entered the dimly lit cafe. There was no denying it. The sight of him, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, ignited something ravenous and reckless within me. His fingers brushed mine as he passed a sugar bowl, and the touch was a wildfire igniting my senses. My brother was never one for subtlety. The carelessly discarded phone on the kitchen counter told its own story, intercepted texts, warnings not to give Mark another chance. It was a gut punch. Had his protection, well-intentioned as it was, driven me further into the corner I longed to escape? I hear there's an interesting new exhibit. The text from Liam crackled with unspoken intrigue. The gallery, now a place I both longed for and dreaded, pulled me back to its stark white walls. It was absurd to pretend I was there for the art. He seemed to sense my turmoil, his presence a tangible thing in the empty rooms. A whispered anecdote from a coworker, a sympathetic glance from an old friend. The rumors trickled in, each one another knife twist. He spoke to me of regret, whispered promises of doing better, yet the stories of nights with her echoed in the empty spaces between his words. It was a cruel mirroring. The same pattern, the same lies, the same pain, but somehow amplified by the hollowness of his remorse. This wasn't just heartbreak. It was a stark reminder of my own fallibility, a self-inflicted burn I couldn't fathom why I kept returning to. Ryan stormed into my apartment, a torrent of fury and frustration. You're letting them play you for a fool. He wasn't wrong. I knew he saw the desperation, the flicker of hope that still ignited whenever Mark looked my way or Liam flicked me a subtle glance. But beneath his outrage, there was something else in his eyes, a grudging flicker of respect as if he recognized a sliver of untamed spirit in my foolish, destructive choices. The gallery opening was a stark contrast to our previous stolen rendezvous. In the presence of his art world peers, Liam kept a careful distance. His eyes met mine once, and I sensed either regret or perhaps a dawning realization of the mess I'd become. Either way, The intoxicating rush of our stolen moments had vanished, leaving a sour emptiness in its wake. The courtroom, I thought ironically, was one of the few constants in my unraveling life. We sat on opposite sides once again, this time not for final decrees, but custody of the dog and a haggling over financial scraps. It felt like a bizarre performance for an audience of none, both of us actors in a play with no clear ending. He looked harried, worn thin by the double life he struggled to maintain. Afterward, the judge offered informal counsel. "You've made a right mess of things," she said bluntly. "No one forced those choices on you." Her words echoed as I walked out, the sunlight harsh against my eyes. The truth, bitter and obvious, rang through my head. There were no answers outside. Mark waited by the familiar curve of his car, an island of a past I clung to. But across the street, leaning against the gallery's entrance, was the silhouette of Liam, his eyes distant. There were no easy paths ahead, no simple resolutions. But this tangled mess of emotions, this complicated web of choices, they were my own. It was a frightening. My ex-husband and his new wife died 6 months ago. We were divorced for 3 years prior to that, after he cheated on me for about 6 years with the woman he married after our divorce. Ex and I share 3 children, a nearly adult son and 2 teen daughters. Ex got his second wife pregnant while we were married, which is how the affair got revealed in the first place. I kicked him out and cut ties except for semi-civil co-parenting. I've never had anything to do with his daughter, who's now a toddler. After my ex died, my former mother-in-law took her in temporarily. She's in poor health and my ex was our only child. The mother of the child had no family willing to take her, so she wanted to try to keep her out of foster care. My former mother-in-law asked me about 2 months ago to consider raising her granddaughter, seeing as she is the half-sibling of my children. I told her I didn't want to do that. She spoke to my children, and they refused to ask me on her behalf. She suggested that my children might want to keep her in the family and asked how I could deny them that chance. So, I asked my children if they had any thoughts or plans to take her on once any of them were 18. They all said no. My son said his grandma had mentioned that to him, but he didn't care. My girls share a similar sentiment, though she did not ask them directly. Former mother-in-law reached out again, and I told her my answer was still no. She suggested that her granddaughter was my family, and I cut her off and said that was not true. I told her I was not this child's mother, stepmother, aunt, or anything that would imply family. She told me she'd need to let the caseworker know in the coming weeks that she needs a foster home if I can't take her. She told me to do it for her granddaughter, that she's innocent, and how could I not love her, and rambled on a lot about that. I lost my cool, snapped at her, and told her I didn't want to help her granddaughter, and foster care was the best place for her, if she couldn't raise her. My former mother-in-law told me I was a horrible, evil woman, and that it was no wonder my children didn't care about their sister when I had that attitude about her, and she hoped one day it wouldn't come back to bite me in the butt. Am I the idiot for how I spoke to her and what I said about her granddaughter? Not the idiot. It's insane for the ex-mother-in-law to try to rope you into this. You went above and beyond, even talking to your kids about this. The child is a half-sibling to your children, but that doesn't create an obligation on your part. Some people are able to take on roles like your ex-mother-in-law is suggesting, and some people can't or won't. There's nothing wrong with that. Your ex-mother-in-law needs to back off. That was her choice. Now she can deal with it. I mean, it's not insane, it's desperate. I can understand 100% why she's willing to try and do it, and why it's never gonna happen. Everyone's been dealt a crappy hand here, and it has obviously reached an inevitable, unpleasant conclusion. And how great of a life would the child even have being raised by the person who is cheated on, and her being a constant reminder of that infidelity. Seems kinder to give her a clean slate with a new family that can love her without the baggage. I agree that OP's not the idiot, but as someone who volunteers with foster kids, I really wish people would stop viewing the system this way. There is no clean slate for foster kids, and there is no new family without baggage. These kids inherently understand that their life is completely out of their control and their foster families are temporary placements. Adoption will likely be an option in this kid's case, and it may happen, but not before several foster placements and a long court case of the adoptive jumping through hoops. Well, not quite everyone. Opie's ex and his affair partner dealt their own hand by A. Having an affair, B. Not using birth control, C. Not planning for the kid's future in case of their deaths. Trust and wills in pre-death conversations with friends and family are all things that they didn't do. Sad for the child, she'll pay the price for the poor decisions of her parents, but Opie is under no obligation to take responsibility. My brother Harold is engaged to Lillian, and she asked me to be a bridesmaid. I politely declined and explained why I couldn't. Harold and Lillian are extremely unhappy with my decision. I'm a fire marshal. I know it's called different things in different countries. My office investigates fires. Since fires don't just happen from Monday to Friday during business hours, I work all shifts, including overnight and on weekends. I checked my work schedule when Harold and Lillian announced their wedding date shortly after the engagement and long before I was asked to be a bridesmaid. My schedule rotates and goes in a pattern, so I can see it years in advance. I was scheduled to work on the day of the wedding. However, I arranged to switch with another marshal, so I'm not working on the day of the wedding. I've ensured I don't have to work and can attend the wedding and reception. Otherwise, I'd be starting work before the ceremony and not finishing until after the reception ends. To be a bridesmaid, I'd be expected to go to Lillian's dress appointments, go on the group shopping trip to purchase the bridesmaid dresses, help put them together, host and clean up at the bridal shower, go to the hair and makeup appointment to help plan, and go to the bachelorette party to assist with things like making the centerpieces and decorating the reception room, to go to the wedding rehearsal and dinner, and more. Lillian's been upfront about the commitment she wants. However, with my work schedule, I can't do all that. The dates and times for those aren't set, and we have to work around Lillian's schedule foremost. I asked Lillian if I could be a bridesmaid and go to the wedding and nothing else. She said no. She wants her bridesmaids committed to those things. My sister asked me to be a bridesmaid in her wedding, and I couldn't do it for similar reasons, on top of being in the biggest case of my career in the lead up to her wedding. My sister understood and didn't flip out like Lillian and Harold did. I explained the same things I did to my sister back then to Lillian and Harold. Also, I reminded Harold that I couldn't be a bridesmaid for our sister. I thanked Lillian for asking me, and because I was trying to make up for not being able to be a bridesmaid, I offered to pay for Lillian's hair and makeup separately from my gift. Harold and Lillian said that that's not good enough and said I'm exaggerating my work situation. They want me to change my mind. Both of them are self-employed and control their own work schedules. Harold said I could just leave early or not go to work, but if there is a fire or investigation, that's not how it works, and I can't just leave. I didn't think politely declining would be a big deal, but Harold and Lillian flipped out, and other people are getting involved in saying that I'm wrong. Now I'm not sure because I'm getting so much pushback. Not the idiot, and it's not your fault that they're incapable of understanding that the world does not revolve around them. Also, even if there weren't work conflicts, it's up to you. Maybe your P just doesn't want to be a bridesmaid. I totally get it. Weddings are dumb. Yes, OMG. I was a bridesmaid for my brother and my sister, and I will never do it for anyone else. It's so much work and it can be so expensive. The pushback OP's getting dollars to donuts is due to the bride and groom Zilla's actively recruiting amongst friends and family with exaggerations and lies. People love to jump on the bandwagon without knowing the whole story. Oh, let them have their tantrum. The bride doesn't want a bridesmaid. She wants free labor. Even if you committed to the things she asked, she'd find more. The fact that they're completely unwilling to compromise means they don't actually care about having you in the wedding party. They want an extra person to set stuff up and to pay for bachelorette and bridal shower things. No is a complete sentence. You are not obligated to be a bridesmaid. My dad passed away when I was only a baby, so my paternal grandparents were my main caregivers while my mom worked until I was about 4 when she met Jason. There was some weirdness between them, and I'm not sure about all that went on, but I do know when they were engaged, which was 6 months after they met. Mom was in an accident, and my grandparents took care of me until Mom got out. I know this angered Jason and my mom. They felt like my grandparents should have left me with Jason and given me a chance to bond with him because to hear my mom tell it, all I wanted was my grandparents when I was little, and when the accident first happened, I cried for them when I realized I couldn't see her. It sounds like a social worker might have been involved, though I don't really remember it. Jason adopted me when I was 5. He and my mom had just gotten married. They told me it was gonna happen and I asked them not to, but they told me Jason was going to be my dad. I never called him dad. I always used his first name and called him my stepdad, which bothered them. They blamed my grandparents because they shared much about my dad with me. Mom tried to cut me off from my grandparents, but the courts declared that since I had such a strong attachment to my grandparents and they were a connection to my biological dad, I deserved to maintain that relationship. I ended up getting to see them every other weekend, and I got one overnight a month with them. I loved it. I never fully felt comfortable with Jason. He tried super hard to be my dad. He would spoil me and would take time out of his day to spend it with me, but he was also so jealous when he saw that I kept a photo of my dad close by my bed and when he walked in on me talking to the photo when I was little. He'd get upset when I wrote notes for my dad's grave for Father's Day. As a kid, I used to believe more in people existing after death and knowing what we said to them and wrote for them, so I did that sometimes. I can recognize that Jason was pained by the fact that I was talking to and writing to a dad I never knew and never would remember and still used his first name, but it doesn't change how I felt or how I feel today. His hatred for my grandparents didn't win me over either. I do think I loved Jason, but I would never say he was my dad. I'm now in my 20s and engaged to a wonderful human. My grandma's gonna walk me down the aisle. Before asking, I told my mom and Jason so they could be prepared. Jason asked me about money, which I'd never asked for or discussed with him. When I told him my fiancé and I were paying, he offered to pay so he could give me away. I got mad. I told him again that I never asked for that and said it was insulting to think he could pay me to walk me down the aisle. He and my mom think I'm insensitive to his feelings given that I know he considers me his daughter and I've never accepted him as my dad. Am I the idiot? Not the idiot. It makes sense that after bonding so much with your grandparents that you would prefer one of them to walk you down the aisle compared to a man who sounds like he's forcing a father-daughter relationship with you and trying to bribe his way into your ceremony. If he really loves you, he should want you to be happy more than he wants to walk you down the aisle. What so many parents fail to realize is if they stop trying to force a relationship, the odds are good a relationship will form. For example, if Jason was more secure and didn't try to push you away from your grandparents and get mad that you had a photo of your dad, you probably would have been able to get closer to him. Exactly. He can't just try and buy his way into your ceremony after years of a toxic relationship. While traditionally, the father of the bride walks her down the aisle, you are robbed of this choice at a very young age. And since you never had that kind of bond with your stepdad, it's understandable to want someone else to walk you down the aisle. I love that you chose your grandma, and I'm sorry that your mom and stepdad reacted badly. I wish you a wonderful ceremony and a happy marriage. My nephew is a tween. He's my sister's only child, but she has 2 stepkids. My sister's stepkids are my nephew's half-siblings. They share a father. My sister's stepkids have an active mom in their lives and split time between their mom's house and brother-in-law and my sister's house. When my nephew was younger, he told me he felt like his siblings didn't like him very much and that they didn't call him their brother. He heard them tell another kid that he was not their brother. He was upset about it because he didn't understand why they'd say that. I told my sister, and at the time, she didn't seem to care very much. She said my nephew was fine and her stepkids loved him, and all three kids were close. She said I was overthinking what he told me. I didn't really know what else to do, so I let it drop. But my nephew continued opening up to me. In the last 5 years, he has vented, cried on my shoulder, and told me he doesn't think his half-siblings love him. He only truly realized they were half-siblings a few years ago when a friend of his explained he had a half-sister because his mom had a baby with someone who wasn't his dad, and he came to realize his siblings had a different mom. My nephew hates that his siblings don't want more to do with him. He longs to be closer, so he asked me for help on how. I told him not to push them, but he could always ask if they wanted to watch a movie or play on a trampoline, and I told him if they say no, he needs to accept their no. I did tell my nephew he should talk to his parents about it, but he said that they didn't care. After asking him some questions, I realized they didn't see the whole picture, or at least the picture my nephew saw. At least they didn't until one of the teens did a genealogy project for school and didn't include my nephew at all. This led to some questions being asked, the older kids saying they only acknowledged one sibling, and my sister and her husband talking to my nephew who said how he felt. He also told my sister he spoke to me. She was furious with me. I pointed out I had come to her, and she dismissed it. She said I should have done it again, and kept trying to make her understand. I said if I had done that, she would have accused me of getting involved in something that was none of my business. She admitted she would have, but my nephew would have been better off. She told me that he's her son, and she should be told when he's feeling like that. She asked me how she was meant to feel hearing her son say that he didn't think he was loved or wanted. She told me I should have involved her. Am I the idiot? Not the idiot. It sounds to me that your sister feels so guilty that she's desperate to share the blame. You're right that you could have done nothing without risking your sister reacting negatively, ultimately jeopardizing your relationship with your nephew. Your sister needs to own that she messed up, and she needs to listen better. People don't need to try to make her hear. There's no way that Opie was the first person the nephew talked about this with. As a young child, he absolutely told his parents first, and they dismissed his feelings. Then he told Opie she validated his feelings and became a safe person to express them after his parents taught him that they weren't safe people to talk about this with. This continued for 5 more years. You tried more than once. She's using you to mitigate her guilt and try to stay on her high horse. Don't let her. He told her. You told her. Both of you. More than once. What more did she want? God himself to make someone put it in skywriting? She'd still say it was a prank and keep dismissing it. My 35 female husband passed away a few years ago in an accident, so now it's just me and my son, young grammar school age. My husband was the main breadwinner, so it has been rough. I work until late, and he gets out of school at 3. My sister-in-law doesn't work. Her husband owns a very successful business, and she helps out. Sister-in-law picks my son up from school and brings him to her house to hang out and do homework until I can pick him up. On Wednesday, she called me while I was already at work to tell me she and her husband got last-minute concert tickets, so she couldn't pick him up from school. I was angry. It would be one thing if I knew in advance and could make other arrangements, but she just sprung it on me. I asked her to reconsider and reminded her that she made this commitment and that breaking it would be really crappy. She still went to the concert. I had to leave work 6 hours early and lost out on all those hours. I figured since she put me in this spot, she should have to recoup my income as it's the only thing me and my son survive on. I sent her a Venmo request for the amount I lost out on. A few minutes later, I got a nasty text from her about how she was not paying for it. I had to send my son home with one of his friends yesterday and today because she won't pick him up. I told some of my friends and they're 50 to 50 on if I should have done it, but I need that income and she made a commitment to me and my son. That's more important than going to a concert to get drunk. Edit. She helps me out for free with my son. This is amazingly stupid. Your sister-in-law babysits for free and you want to charge her money when she can't babysit for free. Wild. You are the idiot. Your sister-in-law is not your personal slave. Your kid is your problem, but you sure seem to have dumped so much parental responsibility on your sister-in-law that you somehow think now that she's a parent and she owes you money to take care of your own kid. That's not how it works. The attitude is crazy. She said she helps out and quotes the level of disrespect from the start to someone doing her this favor. I've been an aunt for more than half my life, and I feel lucky that my sibling has always made their kids available to me to love and train and support. It's been a huge part of my life, but demanding I give up my life because they have kids was never their inclination, let alone their right to assume. Opie doesn't seem to understand that her needs and sister-in-law's priorities will sometimes differ. Lady, I would never watch your child again. You can hire a babysitter. You are the idiot for the Venmo request and for not having a backup plan. What if it were a true emergency? What would you have done then? You must ensure you have a backup plan for childcare for your son. Your sister-in-law has been providing free childcare 5 days a week for 5 to 6 hours a day, including picking up your son from school and probably providing snacks and meals. That's a lot. We pay $1,200 a month for daycare and aftercare. I'd probably step away from an unpaid job that expected me to pay when I couldn't work. You should readjust